All right, let's go ahead and get started. I want to extend a warm welcome to everyone who's joining us today. We really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to join us, and hopefully you'll find this very productive and informative. My name is Terry Shallow. I'm with the Running Industry Association. Today's webinar is the second in our new webinar series that we're really excited about. Last week, we were with Sports Marketing Surveys and focused on sales trends in the channel. And today we're going to shift focus a little bit and take a look at consumer insights. Today's talk will be presented by Jenna Klein-Johnson and Aaron Flynn from Blaze Media. Blaze is our newest associate member, so welcome aboard, Blaze. And while they are a full service marketing firm, that's a mouthful, they focus on consumer research and strategy. So we'll be partnering with them on some projects to that end in 2021 that we're pretty excited about. Let me introduce our speakers a little bit more formally. Jenna is co-founder and partner at Blaze, and she has a 20-year history in the outdoor industry. Her focus is on marketing and business strategy. Aaron is VP of Running and Outdoor at Blaze, and many of you may remember her from her days at Saucony, and probably embarrass her by telling you that she is also married to Pat O'Malley, who you remember from Saucony as well. So before I hand this off to Jenna and Aaron, I want to encourage you to ask questions as we progress through what is about a 25-minute presentation. We're scheduled for 45 minutes, so there should be plenty of time for Q&A afterwards. But we'll try to get to your questions as we move along. Finally, we're recording today's session, so you'll be able to log in afterwards and review it on the RIA member portal. And if you have colleagues that weren't able to join today, be sure to let them know and they can log in and review it as well. Okay, with that, I'm going to hand this off to Jenna and Aaron, and I want to thank everyone for joining today. Take it away, guys.
Awesome. Thanks, Terry. And hey, everybody. We look forward to spending some time with you today. So while 2020 is probably not a year that's going to go down in anyone's record book as a highlight, there are some silver linings to what we saw this year, particularly around consumer behavior, in that we saw dramatic shifts to the way consumers shop, to the way consumers communicate with brands and retailers. And a lot of those shifts bode really well for the running industry. What we're going to spend the first half of this talk talking about is a recap on 2020 that really focuses on one of those huge shifts that I just mentioned, and that is the wave of new runners and walkers who picked up the activities as a result of the pandemic. That's an audience that our team at Blaze set out to study earlier in the summer or late spring, knowing that it was a huge opportunity for the running industry. And we're going to give some highlights from a study that we undertook around that audience. We'll then shift gears to focus on 2021 and some projections for what's going to happen with consumers in the new year and how Specialty Run can really capitalize on the opportunities that will be present. So as we dive in, just a quick expansion on our team here at Blaze and what we do. As Terry mentioned, we're a full service marketing agency. We focus on, we can pretty much do anything as it relates to marketing. That could be social media, that could be web design and optimization, it could be content creation and design. But within the running industry, we really focus on strategy. Like Terry said, we look at ourselves as outside insiders. Our executive team has spent the majority of our career in-house working for marketers who hire agencies. And we structure our company and our services to really cater to what the marketer needs, knowing what it's like to be on that side of the equation. We look at ourselves as being inside as an extension of our clients' teams, just working on the outside. As I mentioned, we focus on strategy, even though we can do anything relative to marketing, but strategy is the real sweet spot, particularly in the running industry. And data is what drives our strategic analysis. We conduct research, much like we're going to walk you through today, around consumer insights and marketplace research to help companies shape growth strategy and drive new revenue opportunities. So with that said, knowing that data is at the heart of what we do around strategy, I'd mentioned that our team launched a study earlier back in May to understand the new runners and walkers who had picked up the activities as a result of the pandemic. And we wanted to understand what drove behavior with them. So I'm going to take you through some highlights from that study that we launched in May of this year. And as we launched it, we really focused in on gym goers, knowing that that was a huge audience that all of a sudden had to find activities to supplant the closures of their gyms and fitness studios. We wanted to understand how the coronavirus was changing their fitness habits. So we studied 600 gym and fitness studio members across the US. A qualifier was that the respondent had to have had a gym or a fitness studio membership within the last year. We focused on 5 key running markets: Washington, DC, Boston, Chicago, Dallas, and San Francisco. We weighted the survey respondents, the survey respondents that we recruited, heavily towards the millennial audience, that age 25 to 40 bracket, knowing that that's a huge, really important demographic for a specialty run in the running industry. And the reason why that's so important is because we know that the traditional consumer who shops in specialty run retail is between the age of 30 and 60. And the millennials at age 25 to 40 are moving into that 30 to 60 age bracket, and they're going to be there for the next several decades. So it's a key demographic that specialty run retail has to win in order to thrive for the years to come. So 50% of our respondents were millennials, and then the rest of the respondents were almost evenly weighted between older Gen Z, age 18 to 24, and Gen X, age 41 to 55. Finally, our respondents were heavily affluent, also aligning with the traditional consumer who we know shops within specialty run, being an affluent audience. 60% of our respondents had a household income over $75,000 a year. All right, so let's dive in. I'm going to take you through some of the key data points, charts and graphs that we've extracted from our survey. But to start, I'll give you some of the key insights that I'm going to walk you through. First is, unlike in times past where we've seen new entrants into the run space picking up running in eras past, the COVID-driven consumer is here to stay. It's not a temporary change to activities. These are fundamental shifts towards running and walking. This new audience of runners and walkers has unique needs and perspectives. They're different than the consumer base that's currently shopping in your stores. Millennials, that really important age bracket of age 25 to 40, are making dramatic changes to their fitness routines, and they pose a really awesome opportunity for continued growth within the channel. And finally, fitness brands and retailers can be catalysts for community to pull this audience in, to connect with you and your staff and shop with you and be really engaged consumers. All right. Fitness trends is where we're going to start first. When we asked a lot of questions around shifts to behavior, and we're going to start off here showing a graph that asked people to check which activities they had been doing more of since the pandemic began. You can see on my screen, and I'm moving my mouse to show the top 4 activities that people chose. We gave a variety of activities. These weren't the only ones, but the top 4 that people chose were exercising at home, walking, using fitness apps, and running. Probably not a surprise to anyone who's watching this. And these aren't mutually exclusive. Respondents could choose check all that apply. So it's likely that many of the respondents were doing a number of these activities, if not all of them. But these were the top 4. 90% indicated that they will continue with these activities once the pandemic lifts. One of several data points that indicate this isn't a temporary shift. Big surprise to us, especially when we fielded this study back in May, was that millennials are walking. You see here, this is just drilled down to see what only the millennial respondents said. The single biggest activity that they are doing more of is walking at 42%. Running came in second at 30%, but that's a huge takeaway. And in fact, our team at Blaze was shocked when we saw that. We had to run the numbers a couple times just to make sure we weren't capturing Gen X or even baby boomers within that insight, but it's accurate. And we've seen many studies come out since then supporting that same notion that walking is a thing and millennials are doing a lot of it. It's an important note for especially run relative to the products that you offer, showcasing versatility of products as they work for walking and so forth. And we'll talk a little bit more about those opportunities as we progress. But the line between running and walking is blurry. 42% of respondents who are walking more are also running more. So they're not doing it in silos. They're not identifying as a walker or a runner. They're doing both of these activities and other activities as well. So it's really important to note that as a retailer, that this isn't about how they identify, it's about activities that they're doing. And simultaneously or interchangeably is probably a better way to say it. All right, so we wanted to really drill down into this concept of running and new people who are doing running for the first time. And I'm going to show you a graph in a second, but first it's really important to read this stat, which I'll read to you. Of course, you can read it yourself as well. Nearly 1 in 5 Americans count themselves as one of the new runners in the COVID running boom. That's a huge, huge number. And that comes from Harris Poll. Also from Harris Poll, there's a graph here that you see on the screen that shows why these new runners started running. And the single biggest answer, not surprisingly, was to improve physical health. But the second biggest answer, not far behind, is to relieve stress. And that's a really important note, that physical health and mental health are playing a huge role in why this audience is picking up the behavior. Mental health is going to play a role in what Jenna talks about relative to 2021 predictions. There's going to be a lot of conversation around that as we get into the new year. So it's important to set the stage now that consumers understand, are aware of the fact that mental health is a challenge, particularly during the pandemic, and running is a source of relief for that. All right, so drilling further into running, and we start to get into the sizing of the market, which I'll show you in a second. We asked people who said that they were doing more running, which statements apply to them. We wanted to understand what their plans were for continuing the activity. And you'll see at the bottom here that 54% of respondents said that running will be an ongoing part of their fitness routine. Another data point reinforcing the fact that this isn't a temporary shift in behavior. It's fundamental. These new runners are going to continue running. You'll see here, if you follow my mouse in the middle, 23% of respondents said that they're running more than they were before coronavirus and they're enjoying it, as opposed to I'm running more than I was before coronavirus and not enjoying it, which only 10% of people said. So we take that important stat there in the middle, that 23% who are running more than they were pre-coronavirus and they're having fun. And we used that to do a back of the napkin kind of rough estimate, sizing the market. How many people are we talking about here? So you'll see here, I just flashed in some numbers. According to International Health Racquet and Sport Club Association, 62.5 million people were gym members in 2019. If we take that 23% number and apply it to the 62.5 million people who were gym members last year, that gets us 14 million people who are running more than they were pre-coronavirus and enjoying it. It's a really big number. I'm going to drill down to that a step further in the next slide, where we talked about, we wanted to understand these people that say they're running more than they were pre-coronavirus and enjoying it. Okay, so why didn't they run before coronavirus? And we asked them that. And the single biggest answer you see up here in the top was that I just had never gotten into it. With the second answer being, I didn't have time. And that's an important point. That second answer will also play a role in Jenna's predictions for 2021, as we look at changing commutes and remote work and what that's going to look like in the years to come. But this piece at the top, I just had never gotten into it, to us was great news. Like, that's a blank slate. It's not like I didn't see results down here at the bottom. I had too many injuries. It was really hard. Those weren't the top responses. So that means we've got this new audience, right, who's totally new to the sport. It's great. Awesome opportunity. So again, if we size that market, saying nearly 40% of respondents said they just had never gotten into running, that's why they weren't doing it before. Of the 14 million people that we sized earlier in the previous slide, that gets us down to 6 million people who are completely new to running in the US. It's a really big number. And it's important to note that we only studied people who were gym members and they picked up running and walking because gyms were closed. That number is much more bigger than 6 million if you just look at the general population of people who picked up running and walking. So the big takeaway here is the number is really big for all markets. Everyone on this call has a huge opportunity with this audience. It's a very sizable market that represents great opportunity for growth. All right, so how are we going to grow? How are we going to keep this audience running? We asked them questions around that. The first big takeaway when we downloaded the results of their survey responses was around identification. And this point's not going to be new, I'm sure, to anyone who's listening in with us, that this audience doesn't identify as a runner. It's an intimidating concept for a lot of new runners and walkers. They're totally new to the sport. They identify as fitness enthusiasts who run and walk and hike and do other things. So it's really important to remember that in messaging and creating opportunities to bring them into your community, that the messaging around being a runner is likely going to alienate them. So messaging that's directly targeted at them, that acknowledges the fact that they're fitness enthusiasts who like to run, is going to resonate more clearly with them. Also, some other key components that they cited as ways that they're going to continue running, or the things that they need to continue running, is versatility of gear. They want gear that works for running and walking. And so it doesn't mean that you have to bring in walking shoes. That's one thing that we, initially talked about. It was thinking about the traditional walking lines that many of the brands have produced over the years. And Terry, I know that that's right. You've been, working on that for years back in your brand life. It's not that. This isn't the person that's going to buy the traditional walking shoe that anyone who's been involved with product management might think of. It's somebody who wants running shoes that also work for walking. So this is a messaging play and a merchandising play. It's about, for retailers on this call, highlighting the fact that the running shoes you have also are great walking shoes, and messaging that in your outreach when you're promoting new product launches, for example, on social media. Community is another huge piece that was cited at many different data points with the survey responses. This audience wants to be part of a community, and that's a great opportunity for specialty run retail to create, extend the community to include this audience. And technology was a huge part of what creates community for them. It was the responses around technology when we launched this in May definitely skewed towards the younger audience, which won't be a surprise to anyone. But Jenna will talk about the shifts in technology as we look towards 2021, and it's not just about young consumers anymore. All age demos have become more familiar with technology, more versatile out of necessity, right? Everybody had to figure out how to use Zoom and shop online and so forth when we were in quarantine, and those skills aren't going to go away. So infusing technology into the way you build community is not just going to be relevant for your young consumers as you go forward. It's going to be relevant for all consumers. And this new runner walker audience wants it. They want gamification. They want ways to interact with other people, other members of the community through technology. Okay. So finally, online research. We wanted to understand where people, or online research is king, as the single biggest source of where people are finding information. That was what we sought to understand with the results you see up here on the screen, is when people look for information on products, where are they going? Personal experience was the biggest response, the single biggest source of information for products, but a close second is online research on Google. That means website optimization is really important. Investing in outreach on Google, really important. Friends and family, so that talks to, plays really into the wheelhouse of specialty run, knowing that, referrals and people's experience with specialty run retailer tends to be very high. So referrals from friends is really important. But for this audience, you'll note over here on the right that retail store staff ranked at the bottom. And that to us says, we can't get referrals from them yet because they don't know who you are. So it's important to note here, don't get deflated thinking, oh my God, we're never going to win this audience because they think retail store staff has no value. It's not that. First, we need to understand the context. In May of 2020, almost every single market across the country was in lockdown. So it's possible that people were thinking about, in their exact moment, in that here and now, where are they searching for information? So of course, an online source would make sense. Second, we didn't specify what kind of retail store. So this audience, who knows what they were thinking, but it's very possible that there was a wide variety of what people were thinking when they responded, when they thought of retail store staff. And what's really clear to us in downloading this data is that they did not largely equate this with specialty run retail. And the reason why we say that is because we've done studies like this with specialty run retailers to work on strategy projects with specialty run retail. And when we do that, retail store staff ranks #1. So when it's your core audience, when they know you, you rank at the top for research, where they go to find information on products. But when they don't know you, you rank at the bottom. So it's opportunity. It's not negativity. All right. With that, we will turn it over to Jenna to talk about, unless Terry, there's any questions that.
Well, yeah, I want to just kind of elaborate on that last statistic, because I really believe that when a lot of these respondents are probably focused on, when they ask that question, where you're getting your research, their experience is probably, I'm not trying to pick on Dick's Sporting Goods, but that's a good example, where the staff is not well trained, they're not runners and what have you. So that's probably what's in their heads. My guess is if you focused on people who shop in specialty run stores, and that was the only people that were in the poll, then the product research that they get from retail store staff would be much higher. But again,
Exactly.
I think we all know that, and that frankly doesn't worry me a great deal. Personal experience, friends, online research, we all know that those are very, very important these days. So we do have someone who's raised their hand. Let me just see here. Okay. From Ross Martinson has made the comment that and maybe you can address this, Aaron, that Gen Pop and millennials are so close on these polls.
Yeah. It's a great call out. And we showed that to reinforce that fact. In a lot of cases, millennials had different responses. And some of in a short webinar, we didn't have the chance to show all the responses. And we've talked to Terry about providing the full survey results to this audience, if that makes sense. And so you could see a lot of the different charts and graphs where we compared millennials to Gen Pop. Millennials, just to note where the differences lie, they're not only running more than the Gen Pop, but they're buying more. So they're reinforcing their activities with purchases. They're outpacing the Gen Pop in their purchase of running footwear and running apparel. And interestingly, we asked the question about what they had purchased within the last 3 months relative to athletic gear. And there was a variety of responses, everything from running shoes and running apparel to stand-up paddleboards and kayaks and mountain bikes. Single biggest answer for millennials in the last 3 months was running footwear. Single biggest answer for millennials in the upcoming 3 months was running apparel. So it was very segmented, like they got their footwear first and then their apparel second. So anyway, it's a really great call out. And thanks for that, Ross. This was largely the same, and we wanted to show that in this case, all consumers felt the same way.
The only major difference between millennials and Gen Pop and any of the other generations, frankly, was that millennials used the most online resources, or the most, online tools. They did the most research. So they looked at a number of different resources, where older consumers tended to use fewer, do a little bit less research.
Hey, thank you for that, guys. We have a good question from Bridget Riggs, and her question is, as Gen Z becomes a more important consumer block, do you see any key differences between millennials and Gen Z?
Yeah. Is that Bridget? Is that who asked it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, we do. Gen Z is more comfortable, or comfortable is the wrong word, but generally tends to shop in physical stores more than millennials. And that's because millennials came into technology at a young age, so they're very well versed in technology, but it was like a convenience factor for them, where when technology became infiltrated into their lives, they saw the convenience of it and what it brought to their lives. So they've really gravitated towards online everything. Whereas Gen Z came out of the womb with an iPhone in their hand, so it wasn't as much of a novelty, and therefore they prefer in-store experience a lot more. So that's one key difference. Second is hyper focused on sustainability and social responsibility, for sure. Not that millennials aren't, but Gen Z is driving that even more. So that's a second piece. Third piece, and Jenna will talk about this in 2021 predictions, diversity, equity, and inclusion is really important to Gen Z. Again, not that it's not important to any other generation, but Gen Z is the most diverse adult population in US history. They are now, white Americans are the minority amongst Gen Z population. Black, Indigenous people of color are a higher percentage of Gen Z adults in the US. And so diversity, equity, and inclusion as a business practice, as a messaging, in terms of messaging, everything, a social issue, of course, is really important.
Just a quick comment. David, go ahead and type your question in and we'll get to that. All right. We'll wait for him, but go ahead and continue, Jen.
Okay.
Into
So,
2021, yeah. Oh, sorry, I thought he was
Okay.
prompting you for something else. Okay, 2021, sorry, go
Okay.
for it.
Okay, so let's talk about the promise of 2021. I know we are all pretty excited to see 2020 in the rearview mirror for a lot of different reasons. So the next part of our conversation will focus on a handful of trends to watch, making sure that we're bringing some of those hard-earned learnings from 2020 into 21 to maximize success. So there's four trends that we're going to focus on today. The first is the omni-channel experience and how that will evolve beyond commerce. The second one is flexible work. It has impacted local economies, it's impacted fitness habits, and we'll talk about what this will look like in the coming year. Third is mental health. In many ways, it's been one of the invisible impacts of the pandemic, and we'll talk about how specialty run can play a role there. And finally, we will talk about the focus of how DEI will accelerate in 2021 and beyond. Okay, so omni-channel. This has obviously been a concept devoted to shopping in the past, but the concept of frictionless and fluid interactions with brands, that will evolve beyond shopping and into brand experiences and community development in 2021. The pandemic really accelerated technology adoption across all age demos. As Erin mentioned, my 71-year-old mother now only buys her groceries online, and my 15-year-old daughter just loves her Starbucks app. Both will continue to use those long into the future, well after the pandemic, because they make their lives easier. And your consumers are evolving their use of technology, and they're open to new ways to shop and new ways to interact with you. They expect a completely seamless and consistent experience, no matter how they are interacting with you. And traditional brick and mortar retailers, they have a huge opportunity to evolve use of technology to foster brand communities and those seamless brand experiences. And if your organization creates content or develops channel strategies in silos, we really encourage you to break out of those. Designate one person who's responsible for integration and collaboration and finding new ways to create those seamless experiences across channels. Okay, let's talk about the future of work. I love a good meme. I don't know how many of you have seen this. Who led the digital transformation of your company, the CEO, the CTO, or COVID-19? Really across industries and organizations, COVID forced significant digital transformation, and not a lot of these, in many cases, not a lot of these transformations were gentle. They were swift and they were difficult. This transformation, it impacted how we sold, how we shopped, how our kids were educated, how we worked, and it affected the digital transformation of specialty run in many cases. COVID has changed the way the majority of Americans work, and those changes won't end in 2020. The next page shows a chart that outlines changes to work trends pre and post pandemic. This is amazing. Before COVID, 47% of Americans said they never worked remotely. Only 17% of the US workforce was working remotely pre-COVID. And during COVID, it's jumped to 44%. That is a huge shift. And as we know, companies like Facebook and Twitter and REI, they are announcing permanent shifts towards remote or flexible work arrangements. And even just this week, Google announced that they won't reopen their corporate offices until September. And even then, it will be in a hybrid format. But it's not just a Silicon Valley phenomenon. A lot of smaller organizations are making similar announcements in cities around in towns around the country. And of course, a lot of us have gotten pretty comfortable with these changes. We love wearing leggings and comfortable joggers, and we love the flexibility of midday runs, and we love our lack of commutes. These changes, as we saw earlier, also have given people more time in their day, and that's really benefited the running industry because we've created more runners by just giving them more time. So what happens when people start to venture back into their offices? And how does that impact running? So workers say that they are going to be fundamentally rethinking their commutes. A recent GWI poll showed that 42% of public transport users will prefer to walk in the future. 37% of public transport users will prefer to bike. And this is not just public transportation. 37% of drivers say that they will prefer to work in the future, or to walk in the future. And we have a high percentage that will prefer to bike as well. So this means people are going to need gear for their commutes. They are going to need walking shoes. They are going to need packs. They are going to need messenger bags. They will need bike locks. So the question is, how can running specialty service or merchandise for this new active commuter? Okay, so let's talk a little bit about mental health and coping strategies. Obviously, fitness has been a really important coping mechanism for a lot of people. But as people have focused on their physical fitness, they've also been taking a more holistic view of wellness by eating healthier and listening to calming music and other self-care strategies. Meditation apps have taken off. Calm, I don't know how many of you have used that, but it's been downloaded 80 million times. And it was at the top of Apple's health and fitness app category right after the election in November. So meditation and mindfulness is mainstream now, and it will only become more important as we start to recover from the pandemic. We really think that Specialty Run has a huge opportunity to strengthen focus on mental health in 2021 and to help your customers and communities heal. Consider offering meditation classes in addition to running groups, or offering mindfulness tips on social media. You can start small and really see what catches on and listen to what your community needs. So as much as we're looking forward to 2021, it's going to be hard too, but for really different reasons. Medical experts are predicting that the real impact of the pandemic on mental health will become clearer in 2021. This chart compares how concerned different generations are about physical health, their mental and emotional well-being, and access to a vaccine. The biggest concerns with mental health are with younger demos. Gen Z in particular has had huge disruptions to their education, to their early adult life and employment opportunities. Studies are also showing that the pandemic has had a larger has taken a larger toll on women. They've, in many cases, taken on a larger share of child care and homeschooling responsibilities, and many are suffering, tired. Specialty Run, though, we think has this opportunity to have a huge impact on this looming health crisis, and an important role to play in helping your communities recover from really a collective trauma of the pandemic in both their physical and mental health. And so starting to shift our mind from dealing with the impacts of the lockdown into the role of recovery, I think is really important. It's a new mission and purpose.
Hey, Jenna, can you go back to that slide? If I'm reading this correctly, though, across every age demographic, physical health and fitness takes precedent in their minds over emotional well-being and access to a vaccine. So that's still not bodes well for our sport, certainly.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And as we start to really feel the effects of mental health and the kind of cumulative impact that the pandemic has had on mental health, I think this is going to grow. Right now, we're still in kind of a coping phase. And as we move into recovery, I think that's going to grow. But that physical and mental health and how they are hand in hand, I think it's a really interesting evolution of the running industry. Great opportunity there. Okay, so another significant contributor to mental health concerns is social unrest. These really have been the twin pandemics in 2020, COVID and systemic racism. And this year was really a point of reckoning for social justice in the US, with the murders of Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor and George Floyd, the resulting BLM riots, the disproportionate effect that the pandemic had on communities of color. Americans have started to engage in difficult conversations around race. and the pressure for equity and authenticity as it relates to social justice, this will continue to mount in 2021. The focus on DEI will accelerate as companies invest more resources to combat systemic inequity and as consumers demand it. If your organization hasn't started having these conversations, we really encourage you to do so fast. If you haven't joined RIDC yet, please do. They are facilitating some wonderful conversations, and it's exciting to see how many retailers, brands, and running groups are coming together and getting involved. So obviously DEI is important from a social justice standpoint, but there's also a very real economic consideration as well. As Erin mentioned earlier, it's literally the future of your business. The Brookings Institute estimates that the US will be minority white in 2045. Non-white Americans truly are your future. In fact, for Americans under 18, minorities already outnumber whites in 2020. So for younger demographics, we are there already. And running has an opportunity as an industry to be leaders in the DEI space. At the organized youth track and field level, running is a really diverse sport. Adult recreational running, it doesn't share the same levels of diversity. So encouraging and keeping these kids in the sport is important from a public health perspective, from an equity perspective, and of course, the economic benefits to the industry are very clear.
Awesome. So we're going to wrap this up with a couple key takeaways of what this means for the channel. And then Terry, of course, will be happy to field questions, unless you want to do that now.
I want to stop you guys really quick. This
okay.
Colin McKean asked a great question in it, and I wanted to wait until you talked about diversity and inclusion to ask it, because it specifically addresses that. And what he is asking is, with those things being so politicized, and he's in parentheses, diversity, inclusion, sustainability, how do you market that without seeming like you're wading into waters that might turn off a large block of potential customers?
Yeah, it's a great question, Colin. The RIDC is engaging in conversations around these very topics, and they're sticky. Sticky is not even a strong enough word. They're highly complex. There's not a really short answer to it. The quick answer that I would give, and we can certainly talk more about this if anyone wants to, it's first, it's going to be uncomfortable, especially if you're a white organization that has not messaged or included Black, Indigenous, people of color. So if you make that decision to embrace that community, there will be some uncomfortable conversations around that, perhaps some pushbacks, some other murky waters to navigate. Doesn't mean that you should turn around and backtrack from it. But so being willing to embrace the discomfort is one step. The second step is being really authentic, and that word gets used a lot, and I get asked questions a lot around, like, what does that really mean? So Jenna and I are doing a lot of work. We've got a task force that we put together that's really driven by Blaze, with Jenna and I representing Blaze on this task force. And then we have two colleagues of color who are coming together to do research with the RIDC around where the industry stands currently from a diversity standpoint, and then where it wants to go and how we can create, measure and track progress. And when we're talking about these conversations, at the core of it, we're saying that a business in running should represent, from a diversity standpoint, the population it intends to serve. So if we're going to welcome Black, Indigenous, people of color into our community, then we need to have representation internally of those populations. So it starts with staffing. It really starts with leadership, making sure that you've got leadership that's representative of all communities, not just white communities. But it's not just leadership, that's where it has to start. But staffing decisions are important. Ambassador decision, anyone that's aligned that you're bringing on as ambassadors or other partners of the company are important, and who you're welcoming in as community members, to training programs and other events matter. So it's pretty holistic, externally and internally. But internally, you've got to be prepared to represent the populations that externally you want to serve.
Fantastic.
And
Yeah.
I think the other point that I would make is, I know the question was, how do you market DEI without turning people off or wade into waters that might turn people off? I would argue that you don't market DEI. I think you bring DEI into your marketing principles, into your organizational values, and you make sure that you are including diverse perspectives, diverse populations, reflecting communities of color in your organization through marketing, but you don't market DEI, if that makes sense.
So it's more of an organic approach, I think, is what you're suggesting.
Yeah.
In terms of building that.
And values led.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Okay, carry on.
Wrap up? Yeah. Okay,
Yeah.
so we wanted to leave you with 3 key points to have on your radar as you plan your business for 2021. And this is really summarizing what we just talked to you about. The first is a recommendation to invest in technology so that you're reducing friction in the customer experience. And as Jenna talked about, experience relates to commerce, but also to social interaction and communication. So for example, what does that mean, investing in technology? Making sure that your e-com site is user-friendly. So investing in user experience so that it's easy to shop and navigate. The checkout process and the delivery, the shipping process and the returns process is simple. It's one example. Optimizing your website, like we talked about, so you're capturing Google search when people go to shop for top running shoes or foot pain or whatever. Investing in personalized email outreach, so email platform that can send personalized targeted emails, not mass newsletters to your whole database, which is unlikely to generate a high open rate. Targeted personalized emails based on data through your point of sale system that can allow you to send emails that are likely to be of interest to your audience are much more likely to generate a return. Targeted outreach on social media, same thing, by looking at, targeting audiences that are likely to want to follow you and be part of your community based on behaviors that they display on social media is another good opportunity. And these are just some examples. And also from a communication standpoint, when Jenna talked about the experience should be seamless, people are going to want to be able to interact with you online just like they would in your stores. So responding to posts on social media, for example, when they're both positive and negative is important. Making sure that you've got someone who's monitoring your social feed. So if people are asking questions like, what are your store hours? Or do you carry this product? Is part of it. Again, just as examples, and we'd be happy to talk more about what else that could mean in the Q&A. But the second thing we want you to take away is, like Jenna talked about, 2021 is going to be a year of healing. And collectively, as an American society, we've all gone through a huge amount of trauma between the pandemic, social justice, and like was just mentioned, the divisiveness around politics. All of those things contribute to a physical and mental amount of stress that is probably unlike no other for many of us. So as a run channel, we have an amazing opportunity to help people heal from that, uplift them through the power of running and fitness. And there's a million ways that you can do that. You're all real experts at building community and helping people feel great and enhance their lives. So just really understanding that trauma has been a hallmark, unfortunately, of 2020, and using your power of positivity to help uplift people from that collective trauma will be important and will really resonate with people in 2021. And then finally, this channel has an amazing opportunity to bring new audiences into the fold, between new runners and walkers who are numbering in the many millions of people across the country, to Black, Indigenous people of color, like Jenna just talked about. Those audiences represent new opportunities for consumers, for members of your community, and for growth of your business. They require a new approach, a new way of including them that could use investment in 2021, but we highly recommend that you do, as it will pay dividends for your business into the future. So thank you, everybody. We're happy to field Q&A if anyone has more questions.
I think David Smallwood wants to jump in. David, are you still with us? He's muted.
I'm all set, thank you.
Okay. Do we have any other questions? We've had a few good ones here. We're pretty much right up against the end of our time, but anything else from anyone? Well, with that, if you do have any questions for, oh, here's something from Chris. Chris makes the comment that new customers has always been a huge part of specialty, and of course we all agree that it's. I know that to maintain a healthy business, you got to drive about 50% of your business annually with new customers, so that's very key. We're getting some nice thoughts that are coming in. We really appreciate that. Chris, you want to jump in for a moment? Let me see. I'm gonna open. I'll let Chris in here real quick. Go ahead, Chris.
Hey, T. Yeah, quick thing. One thing that I would love to see, and I have no idea how you'd figure this out, but I don't think most of the stores I've talked to, I think there's assumption that there's some flood of new customers coming into our stores. And while we certainly are seeing some, I think it's not like, I think our vendors, I think the media all think like, you know, we have this huge way of pounding our doors down. And I think I've asked probably 10, you know, other stores, like, do you feel that your percentage of new customers is massively different than it was? And basically, we seem to be coming up with no. Maybe a little bigger, but trying to figure out, like, my theory is, like, I don't know, if people that are truly new to it just don't know our channel. They're just using whatever they have for now in their closet. That they're going to Kohl's or to Dick's first, and then they evolve, or are they just jumping online and DTC at a much higher rate? So I think there's just this almost assumption that we're all going to benefit hugely, and maybe we will down the road. But I'm really curious to see, like, where is it going? You know, and I haven't seen it in any data. It's probably hard to figure that out, but just something to consider. I think it's just the path of least resistance to say, oh yeah, they're killing it. You know, just like people think restaurants are killing it with takeout business, but when it's when it's 10% of your business normally,
yeah,
you know, it doesn't help that much. And if you're Domino's, you have a banner year because that's all you do, right? So just something to think about.
Yeah, no, well, first of all, hey, Chris, it's good to see your name on the screen. No, you know, that's a great point. But we don't want to send the perception that we're saying this audience is just organically flooding in. What we're saying is it's there for the taking, but it's not yet being taken. They're shopping online.
Yeah.
They're shopping online. And because they don't know you, right? So it's about how do we pull them in? And they've got to, there's two things we got to do. First of all, it's brand awareness. They got to be aware of specialty retail and what it can do. And then two, they've got to feel like that's a place for them. And so building, you know, programs and messaging and extending your community approach to bring in people who don't identify as runners is important, whether that's subgroups, you know, like even being cheeky about it, of like, here's the running group for non-runners, or different ways of making them feel comfortable, because being around other runners is intimidating.
Right, and I think it's, am I maybe muted, but I think,
you're not,
I won't say we're awesome at it, but it's been, stores have been doing that, and some stores have done an amazing job at that continuously for years now. So like, my main point is just like, I think everybody needs to know on a higher level that it's not, you know, as simple as what a lot of people think it is. But on the other hand, I think a lot of retailers are already doing a majority of those things, because if you have running in your name, you're immediately scaring people off. But you're about something, you mean something, and you're an expert, which you have to be for the runners that come in, but you also have to be able to represent kindly to everybody. But
yeah. And Chris, I think it's an interesting, it's such an important point, and I'm really glad you asked this, because when we asked these new runners where they will be purchasing their walking or running footwear and apparel in the future, 75% of them said Amazon. So I think you're exactly right. I think they're shopping online, but I think and then when we showed you where do people get their information, retail stores were at the bottom. And as Aaron mentioned, we were also just coming out of lockdown. But I think the important thing is that there's this burden, I think, that Specialty Run has in some ways of just lowering the intimidation factor. And so maybe things like having mindfulness classes is a way to recruit people into, the mix. If they're running a little bit, they don't consider themselves a runner, but what are some almost non-running ways that Specialty Run can kind of get people in the door without feeling like they have to say, I'm a runner?
Right. Well, and then you just have to be really careful. Again, I'll stop talking, of losing who you are, okay? So we've seen stores try to do this in the last 5 years, like stop in the running thing and change your name and all these things. And it's worked a little bit for some, but it's gotten very negative on a lot of it, right? So it's a balancing act,
Well,
but don't forget who you are.
Chris, you bring up an excellent point, and drawing on my experience on the brand side, we had a lot of success by sitting down and discussing and talking about what do we mean to the sport of running? Who are we as a brand? And that same conversation holds true for running stores. Who are you? What do you mean to your community? And once you decide what the answer to that question is, it may be different for different stores, but then you go with it and you stick with it. So define who you are, and you're clear about it. Great point.
And the other, important thing to note is just that Amazon's never going to be able to create community. You guys are the ones who do that. That's your, towering strength and important part of who you are. And
Bezos doesn't show up in a lot of group runs last I checked.
No, right. Exactly.
I don't know if you guys can see the comment from Justin Craig, but he's talking about hey, the other big retailers are drawing customers away, but you talked about the gyms where you got your pull from, but partner with local gyms and maybe yoga studios, that sort of thing is a great point.
There are a lot of gyms doing virtual classes, and so bringing in experts from Specialty Run to do some educational content is a great idea.
Thanks for that, Justin. Okay, well, with that, we've run over. I appreciate. We only lost. We were supposed to end at 45 after. We've gone about 8 minutes over, and we hung in there with all but 2 people. So thanks for hanging in with us, everyone, and really appreciate your time today. Again, I want to offer my sincere thanks to Aaron and Jenna, who spent a lot of time putting this together for us. We're looking forward to working with Blaze and with Aaron and Jenna. And again, thanks to everyone for taking time out of their day to join today. This will be recorded, and we will get that information out to you as soon as we're get that up onto our member portal. All right. Thanks, everyone, and have a wonderful day. Again, Aaron and Jenna, thank you so much, and we'll see you guys soon. Take care.
Thank you.
Everybody.